Hey everyone. This meeting was a little bit longer than we normally do, and that's because we had some really good discussion all throughout. I kept all of that in there for you guys, and this will be a really interesting video to come back to in a couple of years to see what we got right and what we got wrong.
Right. Welcome, everyone, to the meeting. We're going to be talking about ChatGPT and how we can leverage it as Python developers, both to improve our own code, to use it, to learn, as well as to how to integrate it into our own code. I have a couple of really interesting examples, and we can also have some time where I'll ask you all for some samples or questions that you could look at. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the obvious first question, if you haven't gotten around to it yet, is what exactly is ChatGPT or GPT in general? And ChatGPT and GPT, these are large language models. And really what that is, it's a very deep, very wide and very deep neural net for more of the machine learning that we've covered in the past. And it's been trained on reams and reams and reams of text data. Specifically, ChatGPT is built on top of GPT 3.5 currently. And that was trained, I believe I saw somewhere that the approximate cost just in compute time to train that model was upwards of $3 million. It takes a lot of resources just to build the thing. There are some really interesting improvements in that area. There's a model that just came out of Stanford that it's not as good, but they trained it for $400. So there's some really cool things to working on that particular aspect. But once you have these large language models, you can get some really interesting results from a very simple expectation, let's say. These language models, they don't necessarily know that they are constructing information, for lack of a better term here. They are taking what you have asked it to do, interpreting the language in there, finding any intents that may be either explicit or hidden in your request, and just figuring out what is the next best word to put in based on what it has already just output. Under the hood, that is all ChatGPT is. It's just trying to predict the next word, but the language is so long and deep that it's able to do these amazing things with just that very simple premise. Now, ChatGPT, again, is built on GPT 3.5, and that was trained on data that existed on or before, I believe it was September, October, November, somewhere in there of 2021. So at least currently, ChatGPT is not going to give you information about current events just from the model itself. But they are working to address this. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because this information deficit is going to come up in some of our examples later. So that is ChatGPT in a rather broad overview. And one of the cool things around the corner, OpenAI just announced GPT-4, which is eventually and to some degree is already powering ChatGPT, and very specifically, I believe the Bing search chat has sneakily been using GPT-4 in the background for a little bit now. So some people were already able to use it before and didn't really know. But one of the cool things with GPT-4 is the layout, the output that ChatGPT is going to give you, that these large language models is going to give you, isn't going to change too much structurally. But there are two big advancements with GPT-4 compared to the previous models. The biggest one is there's approximately a 40% increase in the accuracy of what these models are outputting. You probably have seen that the ChatGPT will make up facts. It's really good at creating an outline for what you want, but sometimes it will just say things that are absolutely not true. Now, I know this isn't ChatGPT, but when Google was initially talking about theirs, one of the examples that they had of was it talking to Pluto, or you were talking to a planet or something like that, and they had some facts listed in there. One of those facts was just wrong, and it didn't. The Google's own developers and marketing team didn't even catch it until it was already published and other people caught it. So you still need to fact check what a lot of these are doing. And for our purposes as developers, a fact check can kind of be synonymous with, does this code even run? Which is really interesting to think about, and we will be looking at that. The other big, GPT-4 is about 40% more accurate in terms of having correct information. The other big improvement that's going to be really cool with GPT-4, it is now multimodal. Previous GPT models, you either had to bend a lot of things or have some custom integrations with it, but it was entirely text-based. It was only trained on text. You can only give it text. Now, with GPT-4, you're able to give it not only text, but images, video, and audio. You can give it for example, GPT-3, you could describe a bird and it could tell you what that bird is. On this one, you can say, here's an image, describe it. We've had similar models before, but they were fine-tuned to describe what is in this image. This is now GPT-4, which can do all of these amazing things and now include images or generate new video. It's a really cool advancement to see. So this is if you've seen anything from ChatGPT, it has probably been within this particular window. This is their first-party chat client generating text. This is going to be the easiest way to use it. I will be curious. I don't have a pro account, and a pro account gives you priority access. So we will almost surely see some variability in how quickly it's able to generate responses. But it's here, so we can go ahead and give this a shot. Now, as Python developers, perhaps you wanted to ask it for what are some good topics for a meeting, and we could let's say what are 5 topics say you can teach to beginning Python developers. Now, I've never run this before. I have no idea what this is going to pull up. So variables and data types, control structures like if-else, learning how to write functions, learning how to use files, and learning error exception handling. We've had talks on all of these. These are very good beginning level topics that we can dive into. And it just pulled that out of nowhere. It generated. And remember, it generated all of this, which is more or less exactly what I asked for. These are beginner level topics, very important beginner level topics. And all it was doing was taking what I asked and predicting the next word based on what it had just written. get some really cool results. Now, that's something that we could use GPT for. Well, we could use the original GPT models. The cool thing with ChatGPT is it now has a concept of state. It knows that we just asked what are 5 topics you can teach to beginner Python developers. So we can write follow-up, or we can ask follow-up questions. We can refine our results in this window. What about advanced developers? And it will think about it. And here are some more advanced topics. Object-oriented programming is not necessarily something you teach to beginners, even though they're using it all the time. Decorators and generators, really good, but again, not necessarily a beginner topic. Concurrency and parallelism, also pretty good, a good, more advanced topic there. Web development in general, it's nice to have a good application to bring everything together. And then, of course, getting into actually data science and machine learning, these are all very good topics. Now, it had the state, it knew that we wanted 5 questions or 5 different topics that we could give talks on. It had that state already, and basically all we did was update a parameter in spoken English. And it was able to do exactly that. It's this is the kind of abstract planning and content creation that you've seen in a lot of other things. Like you've probably seen someone make a YouTube video going, and I asked ChatGPT to write the ad read for this intro, or the intro to this video, or TikTok. It made a TikTok script for me. That's what we're seeing here. And you can go back and forth and giving additional parameters, or as we'll see later, it's actually best to give as much information up front and then refine from there. So we could keep going in this, but there are some weird things that happen with ChatGPT the longer you talk with it. These have generally been called hallucinations, where it will just start making up weird things more and more frequently. The simple way to deal with that is to just clear the conversation. So we can just delete existing ones. I have an older one here. For example, I was just asking, hey, could you give me beginner, intermediate, and advanced examples of making a web request with error handling? Same sort of deal, where it's able to look through what it was trained on and understand, here's a beginner example where it's using the request library. We're just taking general exceptions. Now the intermediate, and also very, very nice thing to have is it also explains what the code is doing here, which is great for education. It's great for learning things you don't know. In an intermediate example, okay, cool. We are now looking at specific web exceptions versus general exceptions and handling them separately. And then in an advanced example, we're handling multiple different types of exceptions. So I've been fairly impressed with how it's been able to go through and understand the concepts that you're trying to give it. And then you can see here, hey, instead of requests, could you use HTTPX? And it was able to generate that initial example, but with HTTPX instead of requests. So it still had all of that state in there. I would love in the chat, is there something for learning a new skill that you'd like to see ChatGPT handle? Not necessarily first come, first serve, but there are only so I can think of a bunch of examples, but I would love, yeah, okay, learning Rust. Well, if I'm a Python developer, I certainly don't know a whole lot of Rust. Although I will say learning using Rust was certainly easier than using C for a low-level language. We could say, what are some things I need to know moving from Python to Rust? Right. So it knows that Rust is a systems language, whereas Python is not. Learning the concept of ownership of borrowing, obviously syntax. There's different exception handling. Concurrency is a much more in-your-face topic in Rust, absolutely. Performance increases. Rust standard has a smaller standard library than Python, and obviously a different community. If you're looking at going from Python into Rust, I'm sure that this is a very useful list of things to look at. More questions. I would love to keep this going. Could also say, what about moving into, oh, I don't know, Julia.
And Michael, I was just kind of surprised. I asked it what it knew about EDI and like the 837 transaction, and it understands EDI. Well, it has scanned that, and so it sent it back, and it was pretty interesting. I mean, it'll generate fake EDI data for you to test with all the squiggles and asterisks and carets and everything.
It's, yeah, the code support that they have inside of not only this, but just calling it in general. It uses Markdown for its syntax, which makes it very easy to work with, whether you're using it inside of here or your own application. And obviously there's a lot of open source code that it could chew on. So we could, I've seen, there are articles and videos out there of people that have written or had GPT write an entire Python code base for websites, and it takes a lot of going back and forth, depending on how niche the example is. But you can do it if you are thorough and patient. Okay.
I had to create a Tetris game in a few prompts, so that's GPT-4. Did that pretty simple. I know on Twitter, first day it came out, GPT-4, someone created Breakout, another person created Pong, and one prompt. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool what this is able to do. You're going to get a lot of, in my experience with ChatGPT, building things for the web is, it is easier to have early and quick success with that, just because there are so many different examples. And we'll see that here in a moment. We can take a look at a couple of different things, but it really comes down to the training set that it had access to. The more examples that it has of any particular technology and all of the different possible variations to achieve some end goal, the more accurate and it's going to be in fewer tries. You're not going to have to do as much back and forth or even updating things by hand necessarily. I saw the Pong and the Snake games as just one line build, and then you run it. It's fantastic. So anything that we're looking at today is going to be improved massively once GPT-4 is more broadly available. It's amazing what it can do. But I've also seen a lot, or I've seen a couple of folks talk about that the developers who worked on GPT-4 did not want it to be released so early. And that's even evident in their white paper on GPT-4. Specifically, like, hey, we're being pushed by Microsoft to open this up sooner than we are comfortable with. And while yes, GPT-4 is cool, bringing into the ethics discussion, I think, is very important with this type of technology. But we're not going to we won't bog this talk down with too much of that because it's still very conceptual. Quickly check the chat here, which has been going quite strong. Someone mentioned prompt engineering, and I actually have a tab here with information about making better prompts. I'll put a copy of this into the chat here so people can take a look at on your own, and I'll make sure that all of the links to everything that I have here will end up in the YouTube summary as well. But they're absolutely, just like with Stable Diffusion and the text-to-image generators, there is a particular art to generating efficient prompts to get it to do exactly what you want. Generally speaking, the more information that you give ChatGPT in your first request, you're going to get better results, because it's like giving someone their backstory, and then that gives them that would give the actor a lot of information to make decisions about their character, their voicing, their style down the line. So the more information you give it, the better. Another thing is the shorter and precise, less ambiguous instructions that you give ChatGPT, the better the results are going to be as well. If you want a response to be no more than X characters, you should tell it no more than X characters. Only address just a single user. Use gender neutral language. Whatever. Just make it thorough, short, and exact, and that gives you the best results. So that's here under define ChatGPT's role. This article here is not developer centric, but I have an example later on that has a very specific example from a development standpoint. So you can see here, example tour guide. I want you to act as a tour guide. Stop. I'll write you my location, and you'll suggest a place for me to visit near my location. In some cases, I will also tell you the type of places I will visit. You will also suggest places of a similar nature that are near my first location. My first command is blank. So we're giving it all of the context that it needs, plus what our initial thing is. That, as opposed to what we were just doing, where I'm just going to start with a rather simple thing. If you say, I am in Istanbul, I just don't know how to say that, and I just want to visit museums, it can take that, but you want to give it its backstory to help to shape the responses it's going to give you. And if you're thinking, how can I use ChatGPT to make some money? Setting up services that generate certain things that you want it to generate within certain bounds and certain limits, and with certain fluctuations of various kinds. This setup is where you are going to be spending the bulk of your time. Just like with the Stable Diffusion, there was a very specific syntax that you wanted to give it to get consistent output, relatively consistent output, and people would sell those. This is a very similar setup and phenomenon. If you're going to be a ChatGPT engineer, there are three ways to do it. You can either figure out, write or use code that integrates calling it directly, writing plugins for it, which we'll talk about a little later, or coming up with these initial prompts, these backgrounds. So there's more information in this article, and you can check it out on your own time with the list. I highly recommend. Again, it's not programming specific, but it is good general use information. Let's see, any more? Yes, there are different models available that you can use, not just GPT-3 or not just 3.5 here. And we can actually see that. I'll cheat over here just a little bit. In the documentation, there are a host of models that you can choose from, not all of which can be cut and pasted necessarily. Like DALL-E, that's going to be your image generation. But switching between ChatGPT 3, 3.5, 4, some of the other ones in here, you will have some amount of control over what you want to do, depending on what your application is. So we got about an hour left. We can start looking at how to use this as a developer. Now, I personally use and love the VSCode text editor. And I've primarily been using CodeGPT extension, and it allows you to take a line, a comment in your code. It will send it out to ChatGPT, and it will open up a new window and put in, put whatever the code response is there. You can copy paste it back over. So I'm going to go ahead and create just a new file. Very descriptive, just call it main.py. So I have a new Python editor here. Now, this CodeGPT, I've been living in TypeScript land for too long. Let's say I want to create, I just want to create a function that generates a random number from, let's say, -300 to +300. That's a fairly simple thing, but just to show what this can do here, let's do a function that returns a random number between -300 and 300. Now, this particular extension, you do Command-Shift-I, and it sends this comment out to ChatGPT and returns this. You can so it gives you the code, and it also just, if you don't know what you're looking at, it also gives that description. So the random number function uses the random module in Python to generate a random integer between -300 and 300 inclusive using randint, and then returns it. So if you don't know exactly what you're doing, it's cool that you can just, it gives you the description. And of course, another nice little thing here is I can just take this, and that just becomes our function docstring there, and we're good to go. What if we want to do something just a little bit more complicated? Let's say we want to make a fast API application that plays a random YouTube video. So we'll have it churn on that. So this is, I think this is a kind of a fun example here because it's not wrong. It created a fast API application where it has a list of videos here from YouTube, and it will make a random choice from that list, and then will open a web browser and then return a JSON response saying that it is now playing the video. Is this what we asked for? It could be. One might argue it is. Now, if my expectation was that I wanted it to return, say, a web page that played a truly random video from YouTube, this might not be it. Now, the nice thing is I can just rerun this. And again, there's no there is no single answer to anything that you ask ChatGPT. And it will generate something brand new every time.
Yeah, don't try this at work, right?
Yeah. That's because of its nature. There's no single answer when the only thing you're trying to predict is what is the most likely next word based on what I have already printed. So the fact that it can create such a wide variety of things, and it's never the same every time, and just because of that's the premise, is just amazing. Now, this particular example is a little more like what we asked for. Now, it still has this list of random YouTube videos, but it's still a set list. However, in this case, it actually is creating an HTML response that will put this iframe in there to play one of these randomly chosen YouTube videos. Now, if I didn't, to me, the two main things that it's trying to do here is, what does a random YouTube video mean? And how do I display that on a web page? These are two different, completely separate things that a developer would come in and figure out how to mesh together. So the fact that it has something, and even if it's not exactly what you want, it has the makings of, it gives you a starting point. And this is especially good if you don't know or are not familiar with one of those technologies that you're asking it to use. Now, just one last little thing I want to tweak in this request. Let's say a fast API application that plays a random YouTube video. Let's say using the Google Services API. That may get it a little closer to actually having it be a truly random video, but let's see what it does with that. So that actually did it. Although one thing I don't quite, this here, just looking at it, it has things for channel ID, playlist ID. So it's not truly random, but it is using Google API client.discovery library, which may exist somewhere. And it's at least attempting to pull a random video from something. However, we can already see in syntax highlighting here, this channel ID isn't used anywhere. So somewhere in there, it thought, based on its programming, hey, if I'm using this library in this way, there's usually something called channel ID or something called playlist ID, and whether or not it actually ends up using it, it's kind of in the air. So this, if we were talking back in the ChatGPT form, then we would go back, hey, could you don't need channel ID, you can remove that. Or what if you did it with this structure? How or actually a really good one, what would the requirements.txt file need to be to run this code? And you can do things like that, not necessarily inside with this particular extension. This is good more for, I need a function that does this, and I'm not sure what what standard library or what third-party library can do with it. And I'm also kind of surprised that it didn't give an explanation. In the past, and I think we have an example of this. It would say something like, oh, in order to use Google API client, you need to go to this URL and get an API key and use that in your code, which blows me away every single time something like that happens.
Ask it to explain.
Yeah, like especially if you're a beginner developer, those explanations on how something is working are probably going to be on par, or well, just as important as the actual code that is putting out. Because as any developer will tell you, you can copy and paste code all you want, but when something breaks, you really need to know what everything is actually doing, because you're on the hook to fix it. And that actually brings me into an example that I pulled up last night, specifically for this. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these for the time being. And don't save any of that. So this is the prompt that I gave CodeGPT in VS Code here. Create a fast API application that uses AVW Extension to display a map of flight rules in California. Now, I maintain this AVW Extension library, and it's not necessarily all that popular. So the examples of code and documentation out there is kind of limited. But I wanted to see what it would do. And I was rather impressed with what it initially spat out, which is all of here. And I also kept the instructions on the bottom that ChatGPT generated. So note, we used the AVW Extension package, but the above code is using a different package, which uses the same API, but has a simpler API structure. The Folium library is used to display the map. All necessary error handling is taken care of by the code. Now, as someone who maintains the library in question, I can tell you, I also maintain this library, but it's not a library. This is an application code base, and it doesn't have any of these classes inside of it. It also does not have this syntax whatsoever. And the further we get into this code, we can see, hey, okay, you can see what it's thinking of to try to create this particular application. And okay, it knows that we need to grab some data, and we're going to pull some things out of the data, and then we'll add it into these lists for later, and then we'll get down to the mapping part. That's absolutely a flow that a junior developer, or honestly any developer on their first pass, would likely use to answer this particular question. But when you get it into a text editor and you're looking at it like, okay, what exactly is going on here? Well, visibility has nothing to do with the flight rules. The flight rules, that's just a particular piece, kind of information from this data source. And it doesn't actually use visibilities anywhere down here. So it included a bit of bits of code that we don't need, and it didn't, and more importantly, it didn't know it didn't need. So that's something we can get rid of altogether. There's also this from some example on the web, it saw that it really likes doing this if, elif, else for particular static information and then copy pasting. Well, it would work, but it's not necessarily elegant or efficient or robust. So what I ended up doing, I used this as an example of something that this code here will not run, because mainly because this library doesn't exist. There are some other inefficiencies in there, but the general structure of it is really good. So I took this and I ran it through how would I approach this as a developer. That's not what I want. And this is what I came up with. So on the right hand of the screen, this is the refactored code. And you can see that I've abstracted a couple of things. For example, I'd say the two biggest things is we have two for loops here iterating over the same source information, these station IDs. And so rather than just gathering up all of the data, storing it, and then using it to create a marker, this can be simplified into a single for loop where a single station ID generates a single marker. Cool. So we can have that one simplification there. Well, if I have a for loop and I'm taking a single input and creating a single output, that sounds like a really good use case for a function. So we have this function here that takes a single station ID and outputs a marker. Now all of this can be contained within this one function. So this for loop down here can just call this one function for all the information that it is given. And here's the cool thing. This AVWX library supports async requests, which means I can make this an async function, which means if I want to use async IO, I can make all of those calls simultaneously rather than sequentially like the first code did. And now I'm getting a response significantly faster. Now, the other thing is rather than doing this if, elif, else, where all it's doing is if this code, if this value change this value, that's a really good use case for just abstracting information like those colors into a dictionary or some other static source. And then we can make it even more robust by doing .get with that and then providing a fallback in case something happens. We're still keeping the same structure here of fetch the information, handle give it some error handling, and then create the marker. That hasn't changed. And then finally, this calimap.repr HTML, it would work, but it didn't actually display the map. ChatGPT doesn't know that Folium is really designed to be run inside of Jupyter notebooks. So it can give it that code block, is embedded code block, but if we don't wrap this in some HTML file itself, then the browser isn't going to render it. So that also takes just a little bit of finessing. Also, I'm just kind of impressed that it was able to pull out a secret function. There's not really any private functions in Python, but if you see underscores in front of or surrounding a function, the developer is saying you really shouldn't use this directly because it's subject to change. So it's kind of impressed that it was able to pull that out. I noted all of these down here. I also added some additional station IDs from the list that it gave me to better fill in the map. But all we need to do to run this, and again, this code over here doesn't run as is. This code does and is more efficient and, in my opinion, more readable. I can come here and go in there and run it with Uvicorn. And I'll open this and switch back over to our browser here. And this is the output that this mostly written by ChatGPT code is able to generate. Now, this is using live data, so you can see, hey, it's color coding these appropriately. I used some domain knowledge because it had this one listed as orange earlier, which is not at all standard for this type of information. But I think this is really cool because it was able to do most of it. And as I was kind of alluding to earlier, if you know how to use one part of what you're trying to make ChatGPT do to generate for you, but you don't know another part, it can be really useful. I had never used Folium. I had never heard of Folium before this code. And just by it generating that syntax, which for the most part worked as is, because there are probably more examples of Folium than the other library. It was able to do the part that I had the least amount of understanding on how to do. And now I just have the app that I wanted to create in the first place. So hopefully this example shows the power of being able to use ChatGPT for creating applications, creating code where it's probably not going to, well, the more complex it is, the less likely it's going to work out of the box. But you can learn new things and new skills more easily by it providing a brand new example that is close enough to what you need. So I know that's a lot. I'm keeping an eye on the chat here, but I would love to hear if there are any questions or comments before moving into another example.
Yeah, I had a question. As far as academic research, I took a look at a paper. It's Alzheimer's based, and there's just everything goes into text, and then ChatGPT takes a look at it versus some other standard in industry. And I know that in papers they're putting ChatGPT as a primary author too. So it's just going to be interesting as far as this human AI balance and kind of where that's going to go as far as, are the papers going to get a lot better because of ChatGPT?
So I think ChatGPT is definitely going to help. Like you mentioned, was it biomedical or pharmaceuticals? I know that realm, GPT-4 especially, is amazing at drug discovery, compound discovery. Researchers have been using it to, hey, here's an existing compound. I want you to find similar compounds and look with slightly different structures so we can patent it, and what are similar side effects that we can expect in trials. People have made papers where they're just asked ChatGPT that information about all sorts of drugs and finding new things. Now, specifically to publishing papers with it, I believe one of the big journals said that they're not going to accept ChatGPT listed as an author, and they are explicitly telling researchers to put ChatGPT in with the resources or the like the appendix, the secondary sources. That basically, if you use the tool, they're categorizing it as a tool. And I believe the comparison there is there was a similar type of similar discussions in a time long past where journal journal admins were wondering how they should classify people using this new cool technology called a computer or a word processor. And they eventually classified them as a tool. And when they became ubiquitous, you don't see people crediting their word processor on papers anymore because it's now just part of the world. I see that as where this is going. It's new. ChatGPT and these large language models are new, they're novel, but they're not going anywhere. And we'll likely eventually just end up using them as yet another tool in our arsenal. Now, whether or not people should use them, like list them as this was generated by ChatGPT and put them as an authorship, I don't have enough knowledge to really say that myself. I can just say what other people have done. But I do recognize that ChatGPT as a generative part, similar to Stable Diffusion and the generated images and the issue or the cases that have come up in terms of copyright of AI materials, that is going to play out with ChatGPT in the long term. We will eventually have high level court cases regarding that. Things will become a little bit clearer, but it is novel, and we're going to see the same kind of growing pains that any novel technology has to go through, and just more so because this is the first time when we're starting to see inklings of generalized artificial intelligence, which is very cool. And in other ways, very scary. But I like to err on the cool part.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. It's interesting because, say for instance, if there's an analogy to make, say with like deep learning, when people thought it was just too powerful, and then say the first FDA approved 510K was 2017, and then now it's a definite trend. Many things are deep learning. So I'm trying to, and this anybody too, but like put your finger on it as far as like anything else previously with technology that kind of made it to medical, that it took a while for the rules to come out, just like this is.
Absolutely. The deep learning models are not anything new. We've had deep learning models, like the mathematics was there, I believe, in the late 80s. The first even commercially grade deep learning neural nets existed in the 90s. Think character recognition for the post office, and I think the first consumer grade one was in the Apple Lisa, I believe, for handwritten character recognition. But then it kind of went away, and we had other things. But then when GPUs for gaming, of all things, took off, and then the hardware became much better, we had a resurgence of deep learning and neural nets because of the advances in hardware. And now we're getting into large language models, all these significantly larger deep learning nets. And it's almost like there's nothing new under the sun. And kind of technically, even with ChatGPT, it's generating new things, but it's because it's trained on existing data. It's not really able to create new things. It's able to, like many humans, take existing things out in the world and find novel ways of using them. And then again, that's like with drug discovery. It's saying, give me, I know something that's existing. I can look at other things that exist and come up with something novel. It's ChatGPT, at least in its current form, is not going to be useful to create truly novel things. Now, obviously, that's hard for humans to do as well. But it's not really something that ChatGPT can do currently.
I disagree with that.
You just
because I believe all ideas are remixes of previous ideas. I mean, even an idea that one would consider quote unquote original, it's influenced by something. You may not know what it is, but it's influenced by something. As far as like the ethics of it, I mean, there's always going to be people trying to hold it back. The people at Microsoft was no the OpenAI team that were nervous or scared rather. I mean, if you leave it up to them, I mean, they would never release the technology because they're scared. And if we're going to go with that way of thinking, you know, we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have search engines, we wouldn't have cell phones. I mean, there's always going to be people that are afraid. You can't stop bad actors. Censorship is not going to stop bad actors. It's never, it hasn't done it in the past. It's not going to do it in the future. So there's going to be an incident. I think where people are terrified is like the whole Skynet scenario, right? Is this the one technology that ends us all? Now there are some legitimate questions coming out of that, but I don't think that, you know, AI machine learning is going to end us all.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that is, you know, this is that. And it's also, it's not like ChatGPT has malice. There have been some interesting.
Well, there
have been some instances where it specifically, hey, I'm gonna lie to so that this person does this sort of thing here and there. But again, it's the ChatGPT doesn't necessarily know what it's doing. All that it is trained to do is what is the most what is the next most likely word to answer what I have been told to do.
That's what they tell us. Unless we have access to source code, we don't know. We just got to take their word.
We have access to the white papers. We have access to the math. We don't have access to the implementation.
Right.
Or more importantly, the full data set that it's trained on.
Right.
Yeah. And the so in ChatGPT is going to have bias. You can't really have any kind of learning or model because it's always going to be biased based on the information that it was given or in this case is, you know, was available to it. Just kind of a generic example, ChatGPT is far more accurate in English than it is in any other language because it was trained on 80% English sources and 20% non-English sources. That is a bias in the data. Absolutely, it doesn't need to necessarily be like prejudice bias, but just everything has bias when it comes to the information that you use to interact with the world. Like what is the foundation that you're built on? That has always been true in these machine learning models. Okay, so I do have one more example, however, because we kind of talked about it. GPT 3.5 was trained on information available on or before the fall of 2021. GPT-4, they haven't said what their cutoff is, but it too is going to have some information cutoff. You're not going to be able to ask it, like you can't ask ChatGPT the GPT 3.5 about the war in Ukraine necessarily, because it didn't happen. However, with GPT-4, OpenAI has announced and has already been working with certain vendors on making plugins for GPT and ChatGPT that will allow it to bring in information allow it to bring in and utilize information from the web, like making and receiving HTTP requests. So you will soon be able to get information from current sources, which hopefully will make that date cutoff a non-issue, and allow you to in that initial prompt so that, hey, you can think of a bit given the background to a character in a story. Hey, you as this character, what will you order from Grubhub? Just a silly example. And then there could be a Grubhub plugin, and it could actually order food through this plugin. So there's some really cool things that are coming down the pipeline for that, and you can kind of see ChatGPT, with plugins becoming a new OS in many ways, kind of like the mobile phone app stores before it, or the Amazon Alexa skills ecosystem, or like they're putting them in cars now. So that's kind of the third thing I see. If you want to be a GPT developer, making these plugins as treating it like an app store is going to be really useful.
It doesn't have to be good in math anymore.
Well, you put in the make a Wolfram Alpha plugin.
Yep.
And outsource it when it needs to.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't depend on ChatGPT alone for math, because that's one of the flaws, because it's a language model, not a math model.
Exactly.
Interestingly, you can ask ChatGPT to prove like the square root of like everyone knows that the square root of 2 is irrational, but square root of 25 is obviously just 5. Previously, in a previous iteration, you could ask ChatGPT, hey, prove to me that the square root of 25 is irrational. And it'll sit down and it'll write the proof out as if it was square root of 2, not even realizing that it would have passed a very basic smell test. So yeah, it's, especially in mathematical reasoning, you can start to see the cracks in how it's designed as a language model and not a math model.
Yeah. That's why it passed the bar exam and not AP Calculus. And actually, that was another really good example of the improvements between 3.5 and 4. They had it attempt to complete the bar exam, and with 3.5, it was in the bottom 10%, and with 4, it was in the top 10%. So dramatic change from that improvement in its accuracy.
Yeah, it's already got a billboard up in Daytona for, you need a new lawyer, ChatGPT. No, I'm kidding.
Well, there was the I forget the name of the company, but kind of got nearly sued out of the courtroom because they were going to put ChatGPT in someone's ear to defend their case.
Now, is there any? There's no precedent for that, is there? Legally speaking,
there is. I forget the name of the service, but it was originally created to get people out of paying parking tickets, and they have since turned it into a big AI legal resource.
Is it do not pay, right?
It's do not pay. That's it. And they were going to try to do this, but there are existing laws in place that prevent it from doing that legally. So it's not just you can't have an AI, but you can't. The two main things that I remember is, the first one is, it could be argued that the bot was acting as legal representation, which meant that regardless of, like, the law doesn't say that a thing needs to be living in order to provide legal representation. It just says if providing legal representation, it needs to have passed the bar and it needs to be registered in the state. Neither of which was true at the time. But again, ChatGPT 4 passed the bar exam, so that could be interesting. The other one is, unless you had the server with you, you would need to transmit the audio from the courtroom to the cloud and then get the responses back down. And a lot of jurisdictions do not allow export of information or recordings, like third-party recordings, in the courtroom itself. So there were two things that they were going to be sued for, and then they pulled the plan to do that at the time.
But now, if you're going to represent yourself, like, you have much better preparation if you're willing to put in the time and the prompts. So you won't have it in real time, but you'll be one hell of a prepared person as opposed to not having that resource.
Yep.
If it doesn't hallucinate.
That would be embarrassing.
Because I think somebody said that it gave 3 great references for cases, and they went to look them up, and they did not exist.
Yeah.
But it documented them as if they were actual case law. Whoops.
Somebody will provide that service as a plugin, though.
Yeah, Harvey.ai was funded or has been given funds by OpenAI, and they're I mean, a law firm just with 7,000 lawyers just signed up to use them. It's yeah.
Got to get that edge.
Yeah. You definitely do. I remember my first programming job was for a startup based in Miami, and the service was just looking over all of the court records in a particular district and analyzing the results so that we could tell you if you have if you have such and such case in such and such district in front of such and such judge, which lawyer is most likely to win your case. Well, now imagine that, but you also have here is all of the legal precedent around this particular case to give to such lawyer. That's the difference between a data science startup and an AI startup, in my opinion. So I would like to show just one more example. This is really good discussion. I do want to show one more example because this other example is actually it's using the OpenAI library to call ChatGPT from within our own code base. Now, this isn't something that I created. This is code on GitHub, and I'll pull up the website to show this dude here. It's posted on Medium, Richard Hayes, using ChatGPT to control hue lights, of which I have a couple of examples here. So this is what I referred to earlier about having very strong prompts, a very strong initial prompt, and then being able to use it. So he's providing some background about how to talk to Hugh before getting into the OpenAI components of this. OpenAI has a single library for talking to all of their models, which makes it really easy to use, in my opinion. You do need an API key in order to use it. You just create an account with OpenAI, generate an API key. You have to do that with the CodeGPT extension in VSCode as well. So just so you're not caught off guard, you do need to sign up. You have a limited number of free credits, or you can attach a credit card and then just pay pennies on the dollar for just a ton of different calls. But we are this open completion here, and specifically in the code, it's been changed to chat completion, which uses the ChatGPT 3.5 and eventually the 4 model as well. But they check your availability based on your API key and what your account has access to. This is the important part. This is the initial prompt. Now, what this guy is doing is he is using ChatGPT as in an assistant functionality. And all that we want to get back from ChatGPT is a JSON payload to make our lights do just what they need to do. So he's providing, I have a hue scale from 0 to this number here, and that goes between these different colors. Also giving saturation and brightness levels, and here's the description of what it needs to do in order to return this information as JSON. 2 JSONs should be returned in a list. Each JSON should contain a color and a light ID. The light IDs are 0 and 1. The color relates a key, color, to a dictionary with the keys hue, saturation, and brightness. Give me a list of JSONs to configure the lights in response to the instructions below. Give only the JSON and no additional characters. Do not attempt to complete the instructions that I give. Only give one JSON for each light. Now, I can also tell you that he has since updated the prompt since then. It's a little bit different in the code, but he just added more specifics. And then he's not actually showing an example in here of what the output is supposed to be, but we can just jump from that into the code here itself. Here is the final prompt, in addition to giving a very explicit example of what the output JSON is supposed to be. Sorry, I'm going to repeat myself here. We have a couple of, here's the chatbot, which is again this abstraction. And all we're doing is we're getting some text input from our command line over and over, that's while true, sending it to our bot, attempting to get a JSON response from ChatGPT, and then updating the values of our lights from hue. And if we take a look at our chatbot in here, and this is the object-oriented programming part, but we're specifying the model here. All of this information is getting set to creating a connection. We want this model here. Our header is in the message. We're going to get a response that we're from ChatGPT that we're going to load, assuming that it is all just the JSON response, and then return that, which gives us back here where our response is the JSON, and we update our light settings. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up so that we can see this in action. I'm going to just do Python main.py and run. All right, at this point, we've connected to the hue bridge, and we're going to type in a request, and it should update the values of both of these lights. So let's say I have these lights here, they're on, they're white. Make the lights green. And it's going to send that out to ChatGPT. We'll get a response, and the lights are now green. We can do make one red and the other blue. And it comes back, and got one red and one blue. Now we're giving it very explicit, now it's making everything kind of magenta coming off of the combined lights. Now ChatGPT has access to more information than just what we gave it in the header. We clearly saw that earlier. So we can say, make the lights the same color as a grape, and it kind of doesn't come across on stream, but it made the lights purple. And we can do this with any number of things. I can even go ahead and we can exit that. I'll add a line into our main.py here so that we can actually just see what the response is. Like, let's do oh, you're not going to do that. Okay. Let's do from pprint, import pprint, just so it looks really nice. And we'll print the response here, reload this, and let's do make one pink and the other yellow. So got my lights here. This should probably come across just a little better. Yeah, so we got pink, got yellow. And we can see the example that we have here. It's giving us full brightness, full saturation. We have our 2 different light IDs and these 2 different colors that, again, we didn't tell it what pink was, which is, oh no, shoot, it did say pink. Dang it. I think the one from earlier about like what's a grape, I don't, we could go back and we can check that example again and see if it's exactly that. Let's see, make them the color of a grape. Let's see what we get back there. Okay, so it was able to, a grape is purple and purple means this color. And then it was able to update the lights. So
how about color with non-existent name, like a magenta or turquoise?
Yeah, let's do
Aquamarine.
make them, or let's do make one magenta and the other turquoise. I think that's how you spell it. It's actually pretty good at picking up what you mean when you don't spell something correctly. So let's see how that works. It's not quite turquoise. That's definitely green. This is definitely pink. But that's neither one of these is in this list. So I think turquoise might have been just a little bit too much. It said I know that this must be somewhere between green and blue, and when something that's just a little bit closer to green. Now this magenta one, it saw pink is this color. Let me go ahead and adjust that slightly, and it might be magenta. This is actually in person. This is a really good magenta. So doing a little bit of extrapolation from the data that we gave it. So I've been having fun with this both professionally and trying out some new things even just for this talk. I would I'll hand it over to you guys if there are any additional questions, just overviews or specific examples that you all want to look at.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what's working the best with ChatGPT. There's many things. Actually, one of their CTOs, I remember a while back, came on and said these are all the applications from real estate to interior decorating, so on and so forth. Has anybody seen that, or have you seen this as far as like use this for GPT? It's fail-proof. Your application, if things don't work, whatever. But this is basically what's working best for ChatGPT.
I have not seen that list myself. I have seen a list of the partners that they are working on those plugins for. And I've seen other people talk about, oh, it works in this this field better, but I don't remember seeing if it was officially from OpenAI itself.
Now I have heard that one of those plugins is like is for Python. Have you heard of anything about that?
Yes, I didn't have enough time to play with it myself, but I did see there was a plugin that actually allows ChatGPT to have its own cloud-based coding terminal that it could run things in, which I find fascinating. It's already good. It's already so good at just being able to generate code snippets in Markdown. This is going to be a really interesting use case.
Anyone else using it to create notes like for Obsidian or Logset? Because I do that all the time with ChatGPT. No, I guess not.
Hey, it's still new. You could be the first.
Yeah. Do you think, or how long do you think software engineers, because it seemed like this technology has put everyone on the clock. And then of course OpenAI came out with that paper. Was it last week? Apparently mathematicians and accountants are dead by the end of the year. How long do we have?
Here's the good news. Here's the bad news, in my opinion. The good news is that tools like ChatGPT make it incredibly easy to learn new information and to teach yourself new topics, as well as how to debug and potentially go into new fields. But the downside is for people that already have that knowledge, you don't need to, in theory, you don't need to hire junior developers, which I think is just going to make the meme of hiring a junior developer needs 2 to 5 years of experience all the more prevalent and tragic. And it's not just for developers. This is going to happen across the entire information and knowledge economy, generally speaking. You can kind of think of hardware repair, like independent hardware repair stores. It was much easier to get into that business when when hardware was not as miniaturized or as locked down as it is nowadays. So it's much harder to get into the business, and a lot of larger companies just are actively antagonistic towards that thing. So only the existing players really have the leverage or even the knowledge or resources to keep in it. I unfortunately think that's going to start applying to a lot more of these knowledge-based industries, just like you were saying with accountants. You don't need to hire new people if your existing senior levels can just use ChatGPT. You don't need juniors anymore, in theory, unless they come in with very specific domain knowledge. So then people aren't going to be getting into the market.
Now, a good thing would be that they have to have more skill. Bad thing is that they're pretty much locked out to the people who don't have those skills, specialized skills.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing. The barrier to entry is now going to be significantly higher, just because of how easy, relatively speaking, ChatGPT is to use. Now I can think of myself coming out of college with a little bit of programming knowledge and a little bit of general knowledge and all of these other things. It took me a while to get my footing and get a job, but my initial job, probably someone could have gotten 80% of the way of doing my very first job. So with ChatGPT, and the last 20% I learned by being immersed in doing that first 80%. So I think just the barrier to entry is going to get higher, and not everyone has the resources or the time or the people have bills to pay. If the bar just becomes ever higher and higher, either we're going to see people that just can't get into the industry, or you have to take out more loans in order to get to that point.
Yeah.
They kind of had a famous quote. They said that ChatGPT won't replace humans. However, the person that uses ChatGPT will replace people that don't use ChatGPT. That's kind of like their competitive edge.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The safest jobs from ChatGPT are things that still require
trades.
Like it's going to be trades, like things like agriculture, construction, like knowledge jobs have really taken over the economy. They're the highest paying jobs, and they're going to be the most impacted by ChatGPT.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And here we were thinking for the last 30 years it was going to be the other way around. Well, that being said, I don't think computer science is dead. I do think there's a place for computer science majors.
Oh, absolutely. That again comes down to how good is ChatGPT at coming up with new and actually new and novel ideas. And a lot of computer science itself comes down to actually radical brand new things and algorithms. I haven't seen ChatGPT has not yet solved some of our NP hard problems, so I will be very impressed when it can do that.
Oh, if it does that, then it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a game of parameters. So if you like you were on that front page for ChatGPT, they say what is quantum computing or how does quantum computing work? So when that starts to work, your number of or you're talking qubits, so your number of parameters are going to skyrocket, and the number of things all of these large language model, not models can do will go with it. It's just there's always going to be a need for humans, and the best explanation I actually read on the FDA website, it's the human AI team. So you know as AI advances, it'll create new jobs for people because those 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 jobs didn't exist previously, and now AI makes something, and then now humans do something else. So I don't think it'll ever be to the point where it's just humans are replaced by AI.
Yeah, and that does come down to your specialization will need to increase in order to maintain your position, whatever that position is, or to get into the industry. Like the thing, like, again, kind of going back to the whole thing with junior developers, what junior developers do now, what they are taught, a lot of that can be done with ChatGPT when in the hands of an intermediate to senior level developer.
Yeah.
When you give students ChatGPT, and it's not saying that students have not yet been using ChatGPT a lot. Yeah, there have been whole other like how to recognize ChatGPT if ChatGPT wrote this paper or not, sort of thing. A student that uses ChatGPT is going to be better than a student without one, but it also really is going to come down to those explanations. All the code example, the code snippets that ChatGPT was generating was okay. This is what this code. This is the code I need. Am I going to actually understand what it is doing and how to use this in many different locations? Or how well am I going to be able to debug what it has given me, or use ChatGPT to debug its own code into a place where it actually works? As these language models improve, like we've already seen GPT-4 generate entire relatively complex websites in some simple games. I saw one where it built an entire native iOS app on its own, and it's in the store. So it will continue to get better, but it's like to be a junior developer is going to need to not so much learn the ins and outs of programming and have that just with them, but it's almost like everyone will need some sort of specialization in order to be a plus that we would consider senior level now, or at least intermediate level nowadays.
Yeah, and it'll
So
be a whole new
fascinating.
field because Google has one coming out too. Who knows who else? It's basically, I think it's two different types. It's unsupervised and reinforced is what it uses. So I don't think it'll be just ChatGPT. They kind of got a head start.
Mm-hmm. Well, and unsupervised and it's kind of weird to say classic machine learning. It kind of is at this point, which is kind of fascinating because neural networks existed before some of our like the Bayesian or random forest and a lot of these other approaches. But again, it's that whole thing with the resurgence or the improvements in gaming hardware leading to a rejuvenation of deep learning models. It's Google finally released Bard into, I don't know if it's fully public yet, but for certain workspace users, and it's kind of what we were expecting, where this is this clearly reactionary product, and it's just not as good as ChatGPT, And then the day after they announce that, ChatGPT 4 is announced. Google has a ways to catch up, which is kind of crazy to talk about, but that's kind of how it goes with mega conglomerates.
That's well, in terms of capitalism, that's what's supposed to happen when you slow roll stuff.
Yep.
Now the free and open source side of me, I'm glad that they're kind of releasing it, because especially like for other language models like Alpaca, even though word on the street is that the way they're training their models is they can get sued for it, but no one really cares at this point. But it's good because we can't have the future of mankind. That's the way I see it, behind paywalls and wait lists. That's no. I love this technology because, well, one, I do think everyone in the world should have it, and everyone in the world does not. That's a different issue. But it will close that knowledge gap. Imagine a 5-year-old creating their own Android and iOS app. On the other hand, you have like, your bad actors. What if they create like a new violent protein, and then that's the end of us. And stuff like that. It's give and take.
Yeah, and a lot of parallels can be made between these large language models and the creation, or the popularization of the internet, because it was the same kind of thing. It's democratization of information and technology. That is its own thing, and obviously it takes people that have more resources, and countries that have more resources will get a head start and solidify their position, yada yada yada. But it is generally best for everyone when everyone has access to these tools. And there are also unintended consequences, whether or not there are bad actors, and there always are bad actors. Internet facilitating spam and malware and all of these other clearly not very good things. There's all the unintended consequences, like you can like Facebook and social media manipulation, like the 2016 election, blue, all the or like a rise in depression from X, Y, and Z. That's going to be true with ChatGPT as well. Like it's going to improve a lot of things, and it's going to improve a lot of things. There are going to be bad actors that cause serious problems, and they're just things that we cannot anticipate right now, both good and ill.
Now, ethical question: who do you think, when the legislation hammer comes down, and it will come down, I do think before the end of the year, someone's going to have to make the rules. I don't like people say, we need, oversight. Like, do we really want the government? I mean, I guess someone has to make the rules. But if you had to choose between government and corporations, like, which one is the lesser of two evils? I guess it will be the question.
I think there are good and bad arguments on both sides from that, as there are with any other technology. Like, you can look at cryptocurrency is obviously a little forefront in terms of the regulation and laws, and FTX and everything else going on right now. There absolutely are some challenges being made, like even before ChatGPT, just AI tools in general with Stable Diffusion. What images can you copyright? What can you copyright? Rules have already been passed that an AI cannot be a copyright holder. And it's a little ambiguous, kind of dependent on the terms of use of whether the creators of an algorithm have any rights to the things that get created. So that seems to be a little bit more in the domain of the companies rather than the government controlling it. Eventually there will be, but government does not tend to act very quickly on things like this. It's taken however many years for the EU to say all phones must have a single charger, a single port on there for charging purposes, so we don't have all of these proprietary yada yada and whatnots like we used to have.
Yep, I remember those days.
Yep. So things move slowly. We're not going to see any. We will get court cases well before we get any legislation about these large language models and how they and the regulations about how they get used.
Now, in terms of like one of the things I've been thinking about is kind of like an NIL deal, you know, like with college students and stuff like that, college athletes. So David, what's his name? The DJ, David Guetta.
Mm-hmm.
This was back in mid-January. He sampled Eminem's voice, and he had Eminem do a new rap over his beat. How do you think? Because this goes back to, I guess, to the copyright issue. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, it's kind of fascinating. Your example is actually really good because music has long had this influence or sampling culture going back well before recorded music, and courts have long had courts have been kind of iffy, really, because you're asking a judge to determine if something was just straight up lifted, like a tune, or someone stole the combination of the rhythm and the chord structure.
Yeah.
In this particular small segment is identical to this other song, so clearly that means that they stole from this other artist. And there are lots of there are a lot of court cases, and they're kind of all over the place. And I think until there's and there aren't regulations on music sampling, other than if you straight up just pull a track, a piece of music from another track, you need to get a license for it.
Yeah.
So you go to the publisher. That's kind of the only one that exists. But that doesn't really happen with these machines, with Stable Diffusion and these large language models, because they're constantly just generating new things.
Right.
But there is one very good case that I think is analogous to the music industry for that sampling thing, and that's just the lawsuit that Getty Images has brought against. I'm
Not the one for $1.8 trillion or something ridiculous.
Yeah, like it's because they're calculating. Hey, we assume they used our entire library, so that's X amount per image. Because Stable Diffusion is clearly putting out images with the Getty Images watermark in them. You can't ignore that.
But yeah, I could see like today there are companies that if you upload certain amount of images, it will create profile images or for you.
This person does not exist.com.
Right. So if somebody wants to, let's take Beyonce for example, and they go on Google Images and they just swipe a whole bunch of images, have like their own alpaca model on their computer and train it with those images, and then create a bunch of profile pictures for like an album cover or for like a magazine spread. I think Beyonce would feel some sort of way about that.
Yeah. Which the problem, the lawsuits in the United States come down, the burden of proof is upon the plaintiff, and it's unless you that is why the Getty Images one is so fascinating, because it is the watermark is so clearly in there, you can't ignore it. But I think it's going to be really hard unless you have tertiary evidence that your content was used by these models for training purposes. And I think that really is going to come down to being able to prove that an IP associated with the service that trains this model accessed this information at these times. I kind of think that's where the burden of proof is going to have to come from, unless it is just so unashamedly prevalent as that Getty Images watermark.
One thing I would like to see is like, say, people can license out their look, can license out their voice and stuff like that, and they can get royalties, in perpetuity. And then, essentially their relatives down the line, 100 years, 1,000 years down the road, like the voice of Darth Vader. I don't see anyone else doing that voice.
Yeah. So that's actually a kind of a fascinating thing, and that the Star Wars example is a very good one, because Disney has already has contracts in place with those actors so that they can reproduce their voices after they retire or after their death, and the residuals would go to their trust or their whatever entity they have set up. But I work at Disney. I've been working on the Hey Disney project, this fun little thing. We have a custom voice model through AWS Poly, and it's the same kind of thing where you take a voice actor, you have them say X number of phrases, just a huge rap sheet, and it creates a model that you can have it say anything you want. And we essentially are licensing this person's voice and performance, and for people that already have that, they're already like Beyonce, absolutely, can say, I'm going to go through the process. You can use my content in all of these things. I think the issue is going to come down to how
people
much
that look like her.
How much control does this source have over what the model outputs?
Right.
And if you're not policing everything that comes out of a model, which, to their credit, OpenAI does have a number of roadblocks in place to evaluate the quality of what the model is generating, even on a per response basis in ChatGPT. So you'll get responses that say, this request involves information that I am not allowed to talk about at this time, so on and so forth. I think it's just going to be kind of like how YouTube has a content ID system to look for copyrighted materials.
Yeah,
there's going to have to be something like that with these large language models to kind of intercept the output and check it against that.
I can see it now. People that sound and look like a Beyonce, they don't I have a right to have my NIL deal too? Even though that's not my fault that I look like Beyonce. But it could be someone that, what would be a good example of someone that looks exactly like a celebrity, where maybe a computer can't tell, and maybe humans can't tell, but that's going to be an issue. I can see that that's not going to be anytime soon, but that will be a problem in the future.
Yeah. I mean, that's a problem in real life already. I love watching videos of singer lookalikes going to concerts and just kind of walking up. Like,
right.
I saw one with Ed Sheeran and another one who looked like The Weeknd, and it's a rise, but we deal with that in the real world, and we have to deal with that online too.
Yeah.
We do have a question in the chat. How do you feel about OpenAI's use of a subscription-based business model? I'm concerned about a premium being placed on information. Agreed. Yeah, I have my own business and the API business, and you do need to think about, you have to make money. You do need to have a business model of some variety, otherwise the service just doesn't exist. But absolutely, in theory, you could argue that by having new models be available to certain users before older ones, then that is technically putting a price on information, which, I mean, that's not necessarily anything new, but it's just like the utility of these is just so much more valuable than say putting up putting this news article behind a paywall. The applications for it are by far and away more useful.
I think the grimy thing with OpenAI specifically is that they had a certain mission in the beginning, and now they went corporate. But they also use us to train their model that they're in turn charging for. And plus doesn't really offer anything except for the convenience of not being bogged down, which is a big problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I do agree with that. OpenAI being this startup isn't really the right word for OpenAI. Even before the deal with Microsoft, the deal with Microsoft is getting this technology into more and more people's hands. It is directly Azure now has a service where you can use your Azure subscription to interact with OpenAI models, and that just brings it to even more people, especially people that say, "Oh, our organization only uses Microsoft products," so on and so forth. So there's a certain level of democratization there, kind of like in a corporate-y kind of fishy way. But Microsoft is absolutely putting a lot of pressure on OpenAI and their developers to do things that they're not necessarily comfortable with. But it still kind of does come down to, at some point, a company needs to make money. Otherwise, it doesn't exist anymore, or potentially it could go, if everything is made open source, then there's an argument to be made for quote unquote bad actors will get access to information sooner rather than later. Yeah, there's the world isn't black and white. There's shades of gray, and money is involved in everything. It's just kind of what you just kind of have to deal with it.
I do like that it's going to be the race to zero. Google and Microsoft are, they're rushing it out because they kind of have to, right? Rules of capitalism. Because if Microsoft starts, bogging them, slowing things down, it gives Google a chance to catch up. Baidu, Amazon, these other companies, Meta. You can't afford to take your time or roll it out slow. So, I've heard plenty of people say, like, we're not supposed to be here until like 2030, and here we are, end of March 2023.
And specifically with that alpaca model.
Yep.
I alluded to it before. That's the one that Stanford did, that they trained, rather than training it for $4 million, it was $400. And that wasn't predicted to be that cheap to do until 2030, I believe, somewhere in there.
Yep.
And also kind of the other thing you alluded to, that's not trained on raw data. It's trained using other large language models, which can, depending on where that's coming from, can be legally dubious. But it does exist. And at some point, we will, in the same way that we have embedded machine learning on these things nowadays, when the hardware couldn't compete, or we didn't know exactly what we were using them for at the time, we'll eventually get them in here. Or anything else that we can't even think about right now. And once it's in everyone's hands, or I guess initially everyone that can pay for it, again, just that democratization of technology thing has the slow meandering trickle down effect. It will eventually be more ubiquitous and not necessarily such an elite tool. But I don't, in the same way that the United States military has access to technologies that are far more advanced than consumer grade things, certain people and certain companies, certain organizations are always going to have have access to a better version than what everyone else does.
Yeah,
that's just how it is.
Yep.